May God bless you all and give you the strength to fulfill your dreams. Thank you.
When Coretta Scott King went to collect her husband's belongings after his assassination, she found something hidden in his coat pocket. 2 small pieces of paper with handwriting that would shock America. For 23 days, she kept them secret. What Martin Luther King Jr. had written wasn't about dreams or civil rights. It was something much more dangerous. When Coretta finally read those notes to 10,000 people in Central Park, the crowd went silent. Even the White House called them dynamite. What MLK wrote will shock you. Coretta Scott King was only 15 when her family's home was burned down in 1942. It was a 2-story house her father had just built in Heiberger, Alabama. 2 weeks earlier, he had opened a small lumber mill, and some local white men didn't like that. They set the house on fire while the family slept. Nobody was arrested. That was how justice worked in Perry County back then. Coretta never forgot how quickly success could turn into danger for a black family. But her father didn't give up. He rebuilt the house, kept working, and showed her what strength really looked like. That night stayed in her memory and shaped the way she would fight for justice later in life. Not just racial justice, but economic rights too. Even before the fire, life had already been hard. During the late 1930s, while the Great Depression was still hitting families across the country, Coretta was waking up before the sun to pick cotton. She was only 10, but she picked 100 pounds of cotton a day for just 75 cents. Her family was trying to keep their 28-acre farm. After working in the fields, she and her siblings walked 5 miles to school on dusty roads, while white children passed them in shiny new school buses. There were no shortcuts, and when she got older, she had to walk another 9 miles just to attend high school, while white kids had one right next door. She later said the cotton rows toughened her hands and her spirit more than any protest ever could. In 1945, at age 18, Coretta graduated from Lincoln Normal School as valedictorian. On May 25th, she gave a speech that called on Alabama to treat everyone equally, no matter their color. Some of the white people in the crowd were shocked. That same year, she helped start the local NAACP youth chapter and even led a protest against a whites-only science lab. When the school's principal told her she might lose her scholarship, she said a diploma earned in silence wasn't worth much anyway. She was already showing that she wouldn't stay quiet, no matter the cost. Her father, Obadiah, never backed down either. In 1 decade, he ran a barbershop, a taxi service, hauled timber, and opened the only black-owned general store in the county. But every time he started something, trouble followed. The sawmill he opened got burned down just 14 days after it started. White deputies even forced him at gunpoint to give up lumber to their friends. Still, he kept going. Coretta learned from him that owning something gave you power. Years later, when she told Martin Luther King Jr. to focus on jobs and housing in their 1966 campaign in Chicago, she was remembering those early lessons. "You can't march on an empty stomach," she said. That same year, 1945, she went to Antioch College in Ohio. She was only 18 and excited to finally be in a place with integrated classrooms. But even there, racism didn't go away. She wasn't allowed to teach in the local public school because some parents didn't want a black teacher. They offered to send her 10 miles away to an all-black school instead, but she refused. She wrote a long letter to the college president saying this kind of policy made America look like a hypocrite. At the same time, she kept practicing music, violin and voice, for 4 hours a day. She said music taught her discipline, and that discipline helped her understand how to use nonviolence later in life. In March 1946, Coretta joined Antioch's Race Relations Committee. That month, she helped organize something called Brotherhood Week, with interracial events, plays, and even a sit-in at the local movie theater when they turned away black students. The protest got so big that 75 people showed up, and the theater had to shut down for a while. People started calling her the girl who sings and agitates. Even when the school warned her to stop, she didn't. Instead, she joined the 1948 presidential campaign of Henry Wallace, a candidate known for his strong civil rights stance. By her second year, she was on the NAACP campus executive team, already using the same kind of activism that she and Martin would become famous for. In 1951, she won a full scholarship to the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston. She moved there with just $36 in her pocket. While her music lessons were covered, she still had to survive. She worked mornings at a hotel, then practiced music until 10 at night. Her rent was $10 a week, and even with all that, she still sent $5 home every month to help her family. She later joked that hitting high notes was easier than figuring out Boston's streetcars during snowstorms. She believed music and justice were connected, and even used a music theory metaphor to describe how race and class work together to hold people back. In 1952, she joined a peace group called the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom after hearing a powerful talk about Gandhi. At one of their fundraisers in April that year, she sang to raise over $1,000 to support a campaign asking President Truman to stop testing hydrogen bombs. She picked music that combined European classical songs with black spirituals to show that peace had no color. That summer, she helped write a flyer comparing the U.S. military budget to the cost of her entire school, and it got newspapers talking. The FBI even began watching her. One agent called her a potential subversive with a remarkable singing voice. On November 18, 1952, she was arrested at a protest against nuclear weapons. She wore a black coat over her concert dress and chained herself to a flagpole. As she sang "We Shall Not Be Moved," police cut the chain and took her in. She spent 11 hours in jail, but never stopped singing. That moment made her believe that nonviolent voices could break through even the hardest walls. The FBI took notice and monitored her phone calls for years. She graduated on June 15, 1954, one of only 3 black women in her class. She dreamed of singing professionally, but was told by concert halls that white donors weren't ready to hear a black soprano soloist. She got rejected 27 times in 4 months. So instead, she took a job teaching music in Roxbury. She started hosting gatherings at her place where black thinkers came to talk about big ideas. She once said, "If I can't sing in their halls, I'll sing in the streets for freedom." That same year, she and Martin came up with the idea for a freedom concert. It later helped fund the Montgomery bus boycott by blending music with messages of justice. In January 1952, her phone rang in her dorm room. It was a man named Martin Luther King Jr. calling. A friend had given him her number. Coretta almost didn't take the call because she wasn't sure she wanted to date a preacher. But the call turned into a deep conversation about Gandhi, race, and politics. When they met for lunch, she thought he looked shorter than expected. But that didn't matter once he started talking about love and justice. In just 2 weeks, he told his mother he had met the woman he would marry. They exchanged long letters filled with love and big ideas. In one, King compared her absence to a year without springtime. But Coretta pushed back, especially on the role of women. She told him clearly she didn't want to be a background figure. She wanted to use her voice and be seen as an equal. When they got engaged in early 1953, she still wasn't sure. She told her sister she'd only marry if her music career was respected. Their wedding on June 18, 1953, took place in Marion, Alabama. Coretta made sure the word "obey" was removed from the vows. That was bold in a time and place where women were expected to be silent. The wedding was small, costing just $250. Martin wore a white dinner jacket, and Coretta's dress was sewn by her mother, covered in tiny pearls. The marriage license was stamped colored, and some friends didn't come because they were afraid to drive through Alabama. When asked what was next, Coretta said she still had a recital to give and a world to change. After the wedding, life wasn't easy. They lived in a tiny $60 a month apartment in Boston, where her piano had to double as their dinner table. Their budget was just $110 a month. Coretta took on voice students, made choir robes, and kept them afloat, while Martin worked on his doctorate and preached on weekends. When they couldn't pay a $42 bill, she sold her silver flute. They were turned away from apartments by landlords who didn't want to rent to a black couple. That winter was full of hardship, but Coretta said it taught them how to survive and love through anything. Then came motherhood. On November 17, 1955, Coretta gave birth to Yolanda Denise King. Just as she was recovering, Martin called to say the Montgomery bus boycott had started. Within weeks, their phone rang constantly with death threats. One caller said they would blow up the house with her and the baby inside. Coretta didn't hide. She helped organize a network of drivers to support the boycott. On January 30th, 1956, someone threw a bomb on their porch. Glass landed in the baby's crib, but thankfully Coretta and Yolanda were in the back room. Coretta stayed calm, told reporters not to be afraid, and said if one person was killed, thousands more would rise. She even managed to organize a music concert that raised enough money to keep the boycott running. In October 1954, Martin Luther King Jr. was just 25 when he became pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. People were amazed by the way he spoke, calm but powerful, quoting the Bible even in Greek. His days were packed with work. From early morning until late at night, he was visiting church members, leading meetings, and giving speeches. But while the city listened to him, his wife Coretta was alone at home. She was 27, pregnant, and had just moved into their rented house. She unpacked their wedding gifts and tried to understand the strict rules of the South. She wrote weekly letters to her parents, sharing both her loneliness and the pain of losing her baby that summer, something they kept secret from the church to protect Martin's image. After more than a year of marriage, they had barely shared 40 dinners together. Everything changed in December 1955 when Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat. Just 54 minutes later, Martin was chosen to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. He was only 26. That same week, he started getting dozens of death threats every night. He wrote down the phone numbers on grocery bags. Then one night, while Coretta was holding their newborn baby Yolanda in the bedroom, a bomb exploded on their porch. It shattered the windows and threw part of the porch into the street. By some miracle, no one was hurt. But the police found 6 more sticks of dynamite ready to blow up the whole house. Martin told the angry crowd outside to stay peaceful, but later he confessed to Coretta he was full of fear. He wondered how he could keep going with a boycott that would last 381 days, cut bus profits by 65%, and cost them $2,000 in fines, even though their annual income was only $4,000. By the spring of 1956, he was completely exhausted. He had traveled over 30,000 miles to support the boycott, speak at rallies, and appear in court. He collapsed more than once sleeping 36 hours straight. That March, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover signed off on secretly tapping Martin's home phone. He admitted King wasn't a communist, but called him the most dangerous black leader in the country. Hidden microphones were placed even in the church's choir loft. Agents listened to Coretta's phone calls about baby formula and church songs. Martin started checking closets for killers every night. Coretta begged him to keep a gun, but he refused. Instead, they created a secret signal. If he ever said, "Bring the blue book," it meant she had to run with the children to a neighbor's storm shelter. Then came September 20th, 1958. Martin was in Harlem signing books when a woman walked up and asked, "Are you Martin Luther King?" Before he could answer, she stabbed him in the chest with a steel letter opener. The blade came so close to his heart that one small cough could have killed him. Doctors had to borrow special tools from another hospital to save him. He stayed in the hospital for 17 days, receiving 15,000 letters and cards, including one from President Eisenhower. When it was all over, he told Coretta the surgery cost more than their house. That moment changed him. He said if one person with a knife could nearly stop the truth, he would treat every day like it might be his last. But something even more painful happened just before that. In October 1957, FBI agents had mailed tapes of Martin in a motel room with another woman. They labeled it sex evidence. In April 1958, Coretta found one of the FBI's letters hinting at bad behavior while sorting his mail. She confronted him. He admitted there was an emotional connection, but begged her not to let the government turn them against each other. She went to her mother's house for a week, then came back. She told a friend the movement wasn't just his, it was hers too. When they traveled to India in 1959, she made sure to go with him and joked that the FBI could now record an empty hotel room. Between 1957 and 1960, Martin created the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and traveled around 780,000 miles, giving more than 200 speeches and nearly as many fundraisers. Coretta stayed home with the kids, receiving as many as 40 threats a week. Their house still had broken windows from a past bombing. Money was tight. His $6,000 salary barely covered rent. So Coretta stretched every dollar from his lectures, and even secretly paid for a second phone line so their children wouldn't be terrified by bomb threats at night. In a letter from 1959, she admitted that sometimes she wished the movement would slow down, just enough for their kids to remember what their father looked like. Then, in October 1960, Martin joined a student sit-in and was arrested. Because of an old traffic violation, he was secretly transferred to Reidsville State Prison, the toughest in Georgia. Coretta was 6 months pregnant and didn't know where he was until she heard it on the news. She begged John F. Kennedy for help. On October 26th, JFK called her personally. His brother Robert convinced the judge to let Martin out on bail. That one phone call won Kennedy the trust and votes of many Black Americans, helping him win the election. Meanwhile, Coretta stood on their lawn talking to 300 reporters, trying to shield her toddlers from camera flashes. In April 1963, Martin was jailed in Birmingham. In that dark cell, he wrote his famous letter on scraps of paper and toilet tissue. But it took a toll. He lost over 20 pounds and barely slept. One night, he called Coretta crying, asking if the kids would understand if he just gave up. She called his closest friend Ralph Abernathy, who rushed to see him and stayed until Martin was released. Then came the big moment in August 1963. Martin stood before 250,000 people and gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. But just 3 days later, the FBI labeled him the most dangerous Negro in America. Hoover planted more bugs and even planned to tell Coretta about more supposed affairs to destroy their image. That day, 150 officers stood in the crowd, ready to cut his mic if they didn't like what he said. Coretta noticed strange men near the stage, signaling each other every time Martin's voice got louder. Even in his brightest moment, they were trying to silence him. Then, in December 1964, Martin became the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. He gave away all $54,123 of it to the movement. But just a week before, Coretta had opened a terrible package. Inside was a letter telling Martin he was a fraud and should take his own life within 34 days. It included audio tapes meant to shame him. FBI files later showed Hoover's team had sent it. On the plane to Oslo, Martin told Coretta he felt spiritually empty. She burned the letter after the ceremony, but kept the tape, never listening to it. She said no threat could take away his worth. Only a few weeks before the Nobel trip, the FBI sent another package to their house. It had a tape they edited to sound like a wild party. Martin wasn't home, so Coretta was the first to hear it. She called him, then played it with his friends. They all agreed it was nonsense. But from then on, she read his travel mail first to stay ahead of the FBI. She also pushed him to speak out against the Vietnam War, seeing clearly how civil rights and peace were both under attack. On March 7, 1965, Martin marched across Selma's Edmund Pettus Bridge, while troopers beat peaceful protesters. But 3 days earlier, Coretta had received another FBI tape. She cried, then called Martin. Still, she stood beside him during the final Selma March on March 25th, in front of 25,000 people. Hoover's agents told President Johnson the tapes might ruin Martin. Instead, Selma helped pass the Voting Rights Act. Coretta knew dignity in public was the best answer to pain in private. On April 4, 1967, exactly 1 year before he was killed, Martin gave a powerful speech at Riverside Church. He called the United States the greatest source of violence in the world. He asked for an end to bombing and said poverty at home was tied to war abroad. Many people were upset. Even the president stopped talking to him. But Coretta smiled proudly from the front pew. She had urged him to speak out for peace. 6 weeks later, she led a march in New York for Mother's Day, saying women suffer most during war because they lose their children. In 1966, the family moved to a rundown apartment in Chicago to understand life in the North. The rent was $90 a month. Martin faced angry crowds, and one rock to the head nearly knocked him out. He said it was the worst violence he had ever seen. FBI memos from that month showed they were watching closely and even suggested replacing him with someone easier to control. Martin told Coretta he felt depressed and worried the movement was falling apart. She told him to rest. He said if he stopped, the dream would stop. In November 1967, Martin told his staff he was questioning capitalism itself. He said maybe America needed to move toward democratic socialism, with jobs for everyone and guaranteed income. Coretta agreed, but warned that the media would attack him. He didn't say those words in public, but he did tell a reporter he liked how things worked in some Scandinavian countries. In early 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. flew to Memphis after 2 black sanitation workers had been crushed to death by a garbage truck. Their deaths sparked a massive strike. 1,300 workers walked off the job, demanding a raise from just $1.60 to $1.90 an hour. King believed this fight was about more than wages. It was part of his plan to launch a poor people's campaign, bringing together people of all races who were struggling to survive in America. But the threats started right away. There were bomb scares. King had to move from his hotel to the Lorraine Motel. On April 3rd, he gave his final speech. His voice echoed with something that felt like a warning. "I may not get there with you," he said. The next evening, while standing on the motel balcony, a bullet tore through his jaw and spine. It was 6:01 p.m. on April 4th. He was declared dead just over an hour later. 3 days after he was killed, his wife Coretta Scott King walked silently through Memphis with 42,000 people behind her. It was the city's biggest march ever. Rumors of snipers circled, but she stayed calm. She even helped settle the strike with the mayor, who gave in on April 16th. In those days, she quietly turned a city's labor fight into something the whole world noticed. The man arrested for the killing was James Earl Ray, a convict who had escaped from prison. He was caught at a London airport 65 days later. He confessed at first, but then changed his story, saying a man named Raoul had set him up. Years later, in 1979, a government investigation said there was likely a conspiracy, but it didn't name anyone else. The report pointed to strange things, like how Ray had money to travel and why there was a map marked with safe houses. Coretta believed there was more to the story and kept pushing for the truth. Even when the Justice Department looked again in 2000, they couldn't explain everything. Why was the murder weapon wiped clean? Why were FBI photographers already on a roof nearby? In July 2025, something unbelievable happened. The government released 243,000 pages of old FBI files. Some were marked Merkin, short for Murder King. One file from April 5th, just one day after the killing, showed a Memphis FBI agent writing, "Congratulations, one less commie rabble-rouser." Other documents revealed something worse. The FBI had placed Coretta under surveillance. They listened to her calls. They followed her. One memo said they wanted to record her contacts and use them to discredit her. They even planned to bug her home in Atlanta in 1971, saying she might be influencing anti-war church leaders. Civil rights lawyers were stunned. The files showed that even after King's death, the FBI kept going after his widow. They saw her as dangerous, as someone who could carry on his message and turn pain into protest. The truth was chilling. The ones who were supposed to investigate the crime were part of the story. When King's body was returned to Atlanta, Coretta went to collect his personal items. In his coat pocket, she found something strange. 2 small pieces of notepaper. On them, King had scribbled what looked like a rough draft for a speech. It wasn't about civil rights or dreams. It was about war. The title said, "Commandments on Vietnam," and there were 10 short lines, each a sharp attack on the U.S. government's role in the war. He wrote that there could be no military victory, that the generals didn't know best, that the people of Vietnam didn't love the United States, that the numbers about the war deaths were lies. The last line simply said, "Thou shalt not kill." On April 27, just 23 days after King's death, Coretta stood before a crowd of 10,000 in New York's Central Park. Her youngest son, Dexter, just 7 years old, held her coat as she spoke. She told the crowd she wasn't reading her own speech. She was reading from those scraps of paper found in her husband's pocket. As she began reading the 10 lines out loud, the crowd went silent. People gasped. These were not soft words. They were bold and angry. They called the Vietnam War a lie, an imperial game, and a betrayal of humanity. TV cameras captured it. Her voice only shook once. The crowd understood that this was no ordinary widow. This was someone ready to take her husband's place. The White House was watching too. President Johnson's team called the notes dynamite. They saw that King's words weren't just about peace. They were about exposing the system itself. Historians later said these 10 sentences might be the strongest anti-war message ever written by an American religious leader. The last line, "Thou shalt not kill," linked the deaths in Vietnam to the violence in America's black neighborhoods. Before she read those notes, most Americans believed King should stay focused on civil rights. But by August 1968, that number dropped sharply. A Gallup poll showed a 12-point jump in people agreeing that opposing the Vietnam War was part of the civil rights struggle. Historians now say that Coretta's reading of the notes helped change the public memory of Martin Luther King Jr. forever. Even today, those 10 short lines are printed in school books and carried on protest signs. They are spoken at rallies, tweeted during wars, and taught in classrooms. All because Coretta refused to let them be forgotten. She found them in his pocket, and she made sure the world heard them.